Okay, we're about two after. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody. I'm noticing at the top of my agenda there, I got 2024 listed. Not true. So we'll just get right into it. Jeff Hammock from the DHHS has agreed to kind of give us a recap of the vector-borne disease summer season. Jeff, I will make you a co-host. So you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, let me go ahead and try that here. All right. Can you see that? At least I haven't got to presentation mode, but can you see the screen at least?
Yep, yep.
All right. I'll probably have to switch the views here. All right. Can you see the full screen?
It's looking good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, hello everyone. Yeah, as Ben said, I'm just going to give a quick, update on our 2025 vector season, both kind of our environmental surveillance as well as kind of where we stand at with our human disease surveillance aspects. And the first thing I'm going to start off here with is our 2025 mosquito surveillance. So we work really closely with our local health departments to do mosquito surveillance across the state. And the green dots here are just the approximate locations of our trap sites. We're lucky enough that we have at least one sentinel sitting in each local health department that is doing mosquito surveillance. And the primary goal is to collect mosquitoes, get an idea of what's kind of going on out there in terms of the mosquito population, in terms of abundance, as well as screening them for pathogens, particularly West Nile virus. And if we just look real quick here, just want to present some data on that. We had a really busy mosquito year. We had a lot of moisture, especially once we got to the end part of June through July, August, September. And you can see, the blue line here, this is just our total mosquitoes per trap by our 2-week sampling periods. And, we were well above average for most of the year, particularly that early to mid-July. We saw a really large spike. Most of this was due to floodwater mosquitoes. So not really our West Nile virus vectors, but that meant there was a lot of moisture, which if the moisture is able to set there long enough and doesn't get flushed out regularly, it can lead to an abundance of Culex, which we did see here with our Culex here numbers here, the seasonality here. We saw a pretty big spike in our Culex numbers, and Culex are our primary vector for West Nile virus. But once we kind of got to the latter half of the year where we see most of our West Nile virus transmission occur, we actually were right around average. So, because of that continued rain, while we had a lot of mosquitoes still, particularly the floodwater species, due to the kind of flushing out, that constant rain kind of flushes out the standing water, so it doesn't allow it to sit there long enough for Culex to develop. So we were kind of around average for that, which was probably a good thing. Um, if we look at our mosquito pathogen testing here, um, again, we didn't have as many pools or as many mosquito specimens as we had tested the last 2 years. But in particular, we did have a good number of positive samples detected, more than we had last year, not quite as much as we had in our outbreak here in 2023, but still a pretty good number there. And this is the number of positive pools by our 2-week sampling periods. You can see we were well above average for, again, the first part of the season. And then kind of we saw at the latter half a pretty big spike as well. And so I was a little concerned that we were going to have some issues. Maybe we're going to see a good number of human cases. And I'll touch on that here a little bit more in a couple slides. But getting back to our mosquito surveillance, those areas that are outlined in the red squares there, that's where we saw most of our activity. So up in Northeast Nebraska, the trap sites in Wayne, they had a really big number of positive samples, the most that they've ever detected since they've been part of our program. And then we also had our two other areas where we've seen a pretty high amount of transmission in the last couple of years. So kind of that southwest, south central part of the state, as well as the Panhandle, in particular Scotts Bluff, and Scotts Bluff usually has a pretty big amount of transmission occurring in their mosquitoes out that way. So it wasn't too unexpected to see the positive pools where we found them at. in particular, again, those kind of south central, southwest, and that panhandle area. Now, in addition to looking for West Nile virus in our mosquito samples, we have also the last couple of years done some expanded mosquito pathogen testing, looking for Cache Valley virus, Jamestown Canyon virus, and then La Crosse virus. And the reason we have been looking for that is we do actually have uh, mosquito species that are native to Nebraska that are known or potential vectors for these arboviruses. And now they're not as prevalent as West Nile virus, but they can cause disease in humans that is very similar. They can cause neurological manifestations in people. And so we thought it'd be kind of, interesting to kind of see, just because we've never really looked to see, how abundant are these other arboviruses circulating in our mosquito populations. And we've detected positive Cache Valley and Jamestown Canyon virus the last couple of years. This year we had a few more positives detected compared to last year, but we haven't had any La Crosse virus detected the 2 years we've been sampling here. So we do know the other two are at least circulating in the environments. La Crosse virus, that could just be, the mosquito species of concern for that. We don't typically find it in large numbers, so it could just be one of those where we just have not found, tested enough. I do know that Iowa has had some cases of La Crosse virus. Here I think they see about a case every 7, 8 years, and this year they had another case that was actually hospitalized here in Nebraska, and so it does circulate here in the Midwest, and so it might be one of those things we just haven't tested enough of that particular mosquito species. And then if we look at our map here for where those positives were, you can see where our Cache Valley was. We had 3 different counties there with a positive sample, and then 2 counties with positive Jamestown Canyon samples. Now, as I mentioned a few slides earlier, we had a lot of positive West Nile virus circulating in our mosquitoes. And so what did that look like for our human disease surveillance? So if you look, we had 45 cases. That's not really, anything to, it's actually below average for us. So we actually have not seen a lot of West Nile virus this year, which, hopefully is a good thing. Because, and it was a little surprising just considering how much West Nile was circulating in our mosquitoes. You can see our blood donors are also a little bit lower than what we saw last year, kind of around the same time as well. And the other thing I'll point out here too with this is our malaria cases. So these cases haven't occurred, local transmission here in Nebraska. They've all been travel related, but I will note post-pandemic, COVID pandemic, we have seen an increase in the number of malaria cases that have been reported during that time frame. Last year we had 18 cases, which was the most since I think the 1940s or 1950s, if I'm remembering correctly. And then this year, again, we're seeing 13 cases, which, pre-pandemic, we were probably averaging around 6, 7, 8 cases. And now we're regularly averaging, around 12 or 13. And then, like I said, the last couple of years, we've been seeing an increase there. So there is, I do have some worry about that because we've seen the last, couple of years, we've had some local transmission occurring in areas in the U.S. And there's even a case that's being investigated for local transmission in Washington State. So, I do have a little bit of worry there. Now, we do think it's probably low risk, but it's not zero. We certainly have mosquito species here that are capable and competent malaria vectors. So something to kind of keep an eye on and kind of keep track of as we go forward here in the future. And then, as I mentioned, this is just showing our West Nile cases over the last 10 or so years. And then you can see 2025, that red line is our 10-year median. We're well below that. We'll add a couple more cases here that have come in recently, but I'm not expecting to see anything, sudden change in this number. We'll probably see maybe 50, maybe 60 cases ish. So a below average year for us, which is good. I think part of what was kind of helping us out with that was, in those areas where I had outlined in red, where we were seeing some of that higher rates of positivity in our mosquitoes. Those have been areas that in the last several years have also, again, had seen high rates of positivity in mosquitoes. So we likely still have some immunity in the population that's located in those regions of the state. And so we don't have as big of a susceptible population in those areas. And so that's probably playing a little bit of a role why we didn't see as many uh, human cases as we expected based on the number of positives. Additionally, in our populated areas like Lincoln and Omaha, we didn't see as much transmission as we typically would. So that also likely played a role in kind of seeing a lower number of human cases this year than what we would expect. With that, I'm going to kind of switch over here now and talk about our 2025 tick surveillance. So again, here the green dots are just areas we sampled this year, working either with our local health departments or game and parks, or even ourselves going out and collecting ticks. And so our most collected tick this year was our Lone Star tick. A lot of that was due to the collection of the nymphal ticks. With Lone Star ticks, you often collect a lot of the nymphal life stage in certain areas, and this is a life stage that can transmit disease. So it's not that it's not important. It definitely is important. It's just that probably that really helps explain why we saw more Lone Star ticks compared to our other primary tick vector, the American dog tick. Additionally, we did also collect some black-legged or deer tick from some of our known areas up in the northeast part of the state, as well as around the Omaha metro area, but not as many as we typically would collect. It was pretty dry to the start of kind of that spring, early summer, and it really wasn't until we kind of got to the latter, half of June into July where we really started to see the moisture come in. But we will be going out here for our fall deer tick surveys. There's a second peak of adults that are active in the fall time, especially once the deer start to move around here in the fall. So we will be going out here at the end of, toward the latter half of this month to go out and try to collect some more adult deer ticks. So that number will probably increase. Now, we're going to look at the pathogen testing results. Again, this is just going to be for the American dog tick and the Lone Star tick. Again, because we are going out for our second set of surveys for the deer tick, we have not submitted those for testing yet, so we don't have results on those. So we'll just look at these two tick species testing results now. And if you look, I have the kind of the top row there that's divided by that gray bar. That's looking at more the viral pathogens, and then below that's our bacterial pathogens. And so if we start on the left there at the American dog tick, you'll see we did test a portion of dog ticks for Heartland bourbon virus. This was part of a project with Game and Parks that we were doing some additional sampling in the southwest part of the state mostly for Francisella tularensis detection due to an outbreak early on there. So that's why you see that there's a smaller number of ticks tested there. Now, if we look at the bacterial side of things, though, that's really where we saw our positives come in for our dog ticks, and that's not too surprising. We don't really think of American dog ticks as vectors for the viral pathogens, but we certainly know they are vectors for tularemia, so Francisella tularensis, which we had 20 different positive samples for that, which was actually pretty high for us. And most of those positives came from that work with Game and Parks. Again, we had a little bit of an outbreak in the southwest part of the states. And so they had reached out, saying, hey, we're willing to come and work, go out and collect some ticks for you guys. And we said, yeah, sure. And so they went out, collected those, and we saw a decent number of positive samples from that collection, indicating that there was, in fact, more tularemia circulating out there than we would normally expect. Additionally, we did have detections of spotted fever group rickettsia. Now, this group includes, the pathogen that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever, as well as probably the majority are other spotted fever group rickettsia that's, there's some debate whether they are pathogens or just more commensal organisms. There's still some back and forth on that, and I suspect most of those are going to be the latter. But we'll find out. We have sent those, or we'll be sending those off to CDC once things kind of come back online there. Once the federal government shutdown is over, we'll be sending those off so that they can do some additional testing there at CDC. And then if we look over on the right there, the Lone Star ticks. The one thing I think that important to point out is we had a Heartland virus detection. This isn't too unexpected. We do know that Lone Star ticks are the suspected vector tick species for this pathogen. Additionally, it was found in the southeast part of the state, which again, I'm not it's not too unexpected. This is probably less, the site is probably less than 100 miles from the original site where Heartland virus cases were first detected in Missouri. So, again, I don't think it's too surprising that we found it from tick samples in that part of the state. Additionally, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas have all had human cases, so it really was only a matter of time before we found, Heartland virus in our tick specimens, just based on what's happening with the states that are kind of surround Nebraska on the east and southern sides there. It's just probably more of a just thing, we have low infection rates in ticks for these viral pathogens, so it's more of a collecting enough ticks to test to detect it. But no bourbon virus detected, so not nothing detected there. But again, in future years, I wouldn't be surprised if we detect this pathogen as well. As more states test their tick specimens, we're seeing a lot more detections of this popping up in Lone Star tick populations. In the bacterial side of things, so again, we had a couple detections of tularemia in our Lone Star tick samples. That was a little surprising. While we know they can be potential vectors, we had never detected any positive Francisella tularensis in Lone Star ticks, but we had our first couple of positives this year. So it might be an indication to just in general that maybe there was more tularemia circulating around in the tick population because we had those positive Lone Star tick samples. Again, spotted fever group rickettsia. Again, this is most likely going to be those kind of commensal, or again, there's some debate of whether they're truly commensal, or can they be pathogenic. There's still some debate there. Most of these are going to be those type of species that are likely detected with that spotted fever group. And then, of course, we had some positive detections for Ehrlichia chaffiensis and Ehrlichia ewingi. Again, these are not too surprising either. Lone Star ticks are the known vectors for these two species of Ehrlichia. But a good number, I would say, of positives detected this year compared to previous years. So it did seem like Ehrlichia was, at least, and where we were sampling at, maybe Ehrlichia was a little bit higher in the tick populations than we've had the last couple of years. And then we also sample for Borrelia lone stari, which, again, there's some debate whether it's a true pathogen or not. There are some clinical case reports of this causing a relapsing fever similar to hard tick relapsing fever, which is caused by Borrelia miyamotoi. So we like to keep it in our testing algorithm just because of that. So we had a couple detections there. So if we look then at our human cases, both disease and other tick-borne conditions, you can see that alpha-gal was at least at this point, is our currently most reported tick-borne condition. I'm not going to call it a disease. It's because it's an allergy that is associated with tick bites from the Lone Star tick. This year's our first year of having it reportable. So, we don't really have any, baseline for comparison. So, but we've had 23 cases of it that have met the case definition. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that as we go forward in the upcoming years. Typically, though, ehrlichiosis is our biggest reported tick-borne disease. And again, this year, we had pretty standard. Nothing was too crazy. Kind of right around where we typically expect it for our ehrlichiosis cases. What I really want to point out is the tularemia down here. So the last couple of years, you can see there that we've had above average, pretty significantly above average numbers of cases. Last year was unique. It was our biggest year ever. And it was unique also in that most of our cases were on the latter half of our season. So in the fall, September, October, when normally we average maybe one case during that time frame, we saw, I think, about 50% or maybe a little bit higher of our cases occur during that time frame. And what was interesting there is most of those were pneumonic forms of tularemia, and most of those were associated with some sort of yard work. So not what we typically expect here. Most of our cases are ulceroglandular associated with tick bites, but last year a good proportion, particularly those with that late season onset, were pneumonic, likely from dirt disturbance or some sort of yard work, kicking it up, from the dirt and vegetation. This year was a little bit more what I'll say normal season, most of our cases occurred during the typical tick season, and most were associated with known tick bites. As I mentioned earlier in a few slides, that we had an early season outbreak in the southwest part of the states and worked with Game and Parks to do some additional tick sampling. And we did have, a pretty good high percent positivity. I think it was about 5% of our ticks collected from the areas where these cases that were part of the outbreak had been potentially exposed to ticks. I think it was about 5% was the percent positivity. And normally, just looking back from 2001 to 2024 for our kind of our baseline statewide, about 0.5% of our ticks were positive for Francisella tularensis. So, it's a pretty big increase that, basically a tenfold increase there. So it did seem to suggest that there was a lot of tularemia circulating in the tick population. So with that, just want to acknowledge, there was a lot of folks that helped work on a lot of things, both from our public health departments, Game and Parks, the Public Health Lab, UNMC, as well as folks from our DHHS vector-borne disease group. And with that, that's all I have.
Wow, thanks a lot, Jeff. Is there any questions for Jeff concerning mosquito or ticks? Okay,
Say,
excellent.
Jeff, this is Pete. You said tularemia tends to show up later in the season, 21 cases. Would you expect more to show up again? I mean, could we match last year's total?
So it's unusual that it shows up late. Last year was an anomaly where we had a big proportion of our cases show up late season. Normally, we peak May, June, July, kind of that
Okay.
time period there, which follows kind of our tick season, which most of our cases are usually associated with a tick bite. Last year, I think 50% or more were associated with uh, some sort of exposure to like dirt or yard work.
Yeah,
And most of those occurred kind of late season. So I suspect there was a lot to do with kind of the season. Last year we had some moisture earlier on in the season. So it's kind of reverse of what this year was, where
sure.
we saw
Sure.
it's spring, it's summer, and then it really dried out. And so I suspect we had a lot, that started to circulate there, especially in small mammals. And then once we got to that later year, some of these small mammals probably succumbed and kind of died off in that vegetation and stuff. And then once it started getting disturbed, it
Sure.
kind of kicked that up. But this year, a little bit different, where we saw most of our cases kind of that typical time, May, June, July, a little bit
Right.
into August here, but known associations with tick bites mostly. So I don't suspect we will match last year's total, but it is
Yeah.
still interesting that we had a pretty big year with more than 20 cases again this year.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason I brought that up is um, last week we had a human case detected, and just today now we ended up with another positive animal from vet diagnostic lab for tularemia. So it may not be over.
Yeah,
That's
and I
what I'm
think yeah,
saying.
and I think the one case from last week, I think that was a Kansas resident too. So I
Was
know
it
they'd
okay? I
yeah,
don't
I
remember.
think it was a Kansas resident.
Okay.
I know one of us was a Kansas resident or something, but some of the states surrounding us too, like Kansas in particular, they've seen the last couple of years have seen, maybe not as high of an increase in compared to their baseline, but have still seen above average cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. We'll see where it goes, right?
Yep.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hmm.
Any other questions for Jeff? Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jeff. So next up, I think we're going to have Lacey Pavlovsky from the HAI team. She's going to give us a little update on C. auris. Yep,
Yes.
we
Hi.
see
Can
your
you
screen,
see
Lacey.
my slides?
Yep.
Yep. Actually, Dr. Ashroff's slides. I won't take too much credit, but he has clinic on Tuesday afternoons, so you get to have me instead. So hopefully I can do these justice for him. But yeah, Ben asked us to come on and give a CORS update about what's been going on this year. I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. If you hadn't heard, CORS has been a busier organism for our team this year than it has in the past. In 2024, it was the first time we had seen any locally acquired and then transmission occur in Nebraska. And this year we have been investigating 3 different clusters that have been going on. So as you can see, it's been kind of busy, but in the first investigation, it was prompted by a clinical case of C. auris in an acute care hospital. This patient had come from out of state, and we were able to link it back to an out of state case by whole genome sequencing. But subsequently, we had several different facilities with different transmission occurring. With this, you can see these cases in red. One of the cases ended up having a screening culture and then had a positive clinical culture as well on that Clade 1 investigation. And through the Clade 1 investigation, we screened into several different facilities. I will show you that in a minute. But in our investigation 2, we actually found Clade 3 C. auris, where Clade 1 had been found in our first investigation. So in the Clade 3, we've only had 2 cases. One was prompted by a clinical case that was noted in a urine culture at a skilled nursing facility, and we were never able to find any cases that linked on whole genome sequencing directly to this case. But we did find another Clade 3 during our screening for our first Clade 1 investigation. So that was an interesting find. And these 2 both ended up being a Clade 3, but they were not related on whole genome sequencing. And we don't really know where either one of these cases would have picked up Clade 3 as well. So there must be some sort of community transmission of Clade 3 C. auris occurring, but we'll keep monitoring for that. And then later in the year, in June, we had another patient and another investigation. This ended up being a Clade 4 investigation. So we've seen 3 different clades now of C. auris in Nebraska. But the Clade 4 investigation was prompted again by a clinical case identified in an acute care hospital from a patient that, again, came from out of state, where they have had more C. auris cases than here, and then subsequently spread C. auris to several other patients. You can see those cases related to this investigation are in blue. In total, we've had 25 screens. You can see here are 25 positives. 2 of those, though it was 2 different patients who had a screening culture and then later had a clinical positive. So 23 patients, 25 different isolates, if that makes sense. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here, these are the number of screenings that we've done at different healthcare facilities. You can tell in January, it started kind of slow. In April, we had almost 400 screenings that we completed in different healthcare facilities. And it's kind of slowed down, but ticked up again when we had those cases late, this fall, where we had almost 200. Oh, it's been over now, 200 screenings done related to the different cases we've seen. Typically, our recommendation is that we have healthcare facilities screen patients who were on the same unit as a positive patient for more than 24 hours. So most of the screening that is done through the Antibiotic Resistance Lab Network in Minnesota, where we have the supply shipped directly to the facilities. It can be any facility type. The facility collects the screens and then ships them back via FedEx to the lab in Minnesota, where they run the swabs. There's only one facility in the state that does their own screening. So that's just something to be aware of. If that has to happen in your facility, we can do that through the ARLN lab in Minnesota, and it's free of cost to the facility and to the patient. So to date, we've done over 1,400 colonization screens. You can see that here. These are the different positives. Like I said, we've had 25 different positives come up, but again, 2 of those were 4 of those were for 2 patients. So 2 patients each had a screening and a clinical positive. We've screened at a total of 74 different healthcare facilities, 17 of them being acute care facilities, and at 57 different long-term care facilities. And since you are lab people, we wanted to share what our antibiotic resistance patterns looked like. We know that C. auris can be resistant to antifungal medications, but what we're seeing with what we've done for susceptibility testing is that only one of the clade 1, we've only gotten resistance testing on 1 of the clade 1 specimens and 4 of the clade 4 specimens. And it really looks like only the clade 1 has been resistant, and it was resistant to fluconazole. The other ones all seem to be susceptible isolates, which is good news of the clade 4, but we didn't get any susceptibility testing for the clade 3 isolate. So that was kind of disappointing. But again, I thought that was an interesting breakdown, since I'm sure you guys would be interested in that as well. And I think that's all I have. Any questions?
Okay, great. Thanks, Lacey.
Yeah, if any questions or anything come up, just go ahead and put them in the chat.
Yeah, I guess I'll take this opportunity to, remind everyone to make sure your libraries are up to date if you're using a MALDI. We sent out the guidance a little while ago on possible misidentifications. Yeah, just good to review that. So if there's no questions for Lacey, we'll go into our epi roundtable. Let me see here. Okay, there we are. So I guess we'll start again at the top with the HAI team. Is there any more updates?
Yeah, other than C. auris, the only thing I'd want to point out is that the CDC did put out a paper in the last couple of weeks. I'll put the link to that in the chat about an increase in carbapenemase producing CRE from 2019 to 2023 in the United States. And the most notable thing was there was a 5-fold increase of NDM producing CRE in that time frame. And we also noticed an increase of that in our numbers as well locally. So it's just an interesting thing, and to be just recommend to, if you have any isolates of interest that are carbapenem resistant that meet the NPHL testing criteria, please send those to NPHL for further testing. If you have anything you'd want to add to that, Jen, but I'll put the link to that study in the chat.
Okay, yeah,
it's a good one.
Yeah.
Lacey, I haven't had a chance to read that one yet, but did they take into consideration the increased amount of testing that occurred during that time as compared to previous years?
I believe they did. Yes.
Awesome.
So I'll put that in the chat. Yeah, and it was in, I think, 23 or 24 different states. I can't remember exactly. I don't have but we were included. Our numbers were included in the in the study. So yeah.
Great. I know, yeah, I've realized just a massive increase in the number of isolates that we've been receiving for testing. So thanks everybody, and continue to send those into NPHL. So then up next, got respiratory. We have Derek with us to talk to us about respiratory.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
Hey, Derek.
Hi. So nothing too groundbreaking to share right now in terms of respiratory activity here in Nebraska. Starting with influenza and RSV, pretty minimal activity to this point, as we would expect early on in the new surveillance season. The few influenza positives that we are seeing statewide, majority of those are antigen positives. So it's probably fair to think some of those, or a lot of those even, could be false positives, since we're just not seeing much else for influenza activity at this point. On the SARS-CoV-2 front, starting back in the start of July, we started to first see increases of SARS-CoV-2 for our late summer wave. We have since peaked and come back down to levels we observed right before that point in July when we started to see increases. So our positivity is roughly around 5%. So it was good to see that come down, but there's still some SARS-CoV-2 going around in circulation, and a couple other respiratory viruses that we do track using our laboratory data. Human parainfluenza viruses and human rhino and enterovirus are still elevated. We've had seen human rhino and enteroviruses decrease over the past few weeks. It peaked kind of in mid to late September, which we usually see a wave of that at that time of the year every year. So nothing unexpected, but that's decreasing, and we're just starting to see a little few week-to-week increases in parainfluenza virus, both lab positives and test positivity. Again, not unexpected. We usually see a wave of that start to increase at this time in the year. So yeah, we're updating both our public-facing respiratory disease data dashboard and report on our website. I'll throw a link to that in the chat. That's getting updated weekly for the new 25-26 surveillance season, so I wanted to call that out. And just finally, a routine reminder on influenza A and subtypable submissions. If your laboratory does get an influenza A positive with no subtype identified, please notify us at DHHS and MPHL so we can get that specimen going to MPHL to get a subtype identified. It's always important no matter the time of year, but even kind of heightened more as high path avian influenza is still around. Nationally, there are increases in the number of poultry flock detections. We haven't had one yet this fall season, but I wouldn't be shocked if we did looking forward. So just want to put that on everyone's radar and a little reminder on that. But with that, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Derek. If there's no questions for Derek, is Sandra on to give us an update for the enteric?
Yes.
Hi, Sandra.
So not much going on with outbreaks in Nebraska at this current moment. We are still part of two multi-state outbreaks. Pet geckos is still going on. The salmonella, we haven't had a case since May, but CDC hasn't closed that outbreak yet. But more recently, we have one case in Nebraska from the Salmonella Loma Linda outbreak so far. So that's still under investigation at this time. So that's all we have for outbreaks right now. We haven't had any in-state outbreaks reported in the past week to us. Overall counts, we are still seeing some activity in the Campylobacter. Numbers are starting to go down. We are still seeing increased numbers for the enteropathogenic E. coli. That's been high throughout the summer and still remaining high. And we are starting to see an uptick in norovirus cases. And so that's all the updates I have for enterics today.
Thank you. Any questions for Sandra? Okay, so we'll come back to Jeff. Any additional updates for vector-borne diseases?
No, I don't have any additional updates. Covered pretty much everything in that presentation.
Awesome, thanks. I think I did see Kristen is on to give us an update for TB. Perhaps not. Is Tammy with us for updates for the STD program? Not today. And then finally, we'll end with dairy for lead testing.
Dairy isn't on,
Okay.
but we don't have any updates for lead today. Oh, hold on. We do have a new lead epidemiologist.
Okay.
So that's Miss Jenna Hohenboken. She'll be taking over updates starting next month. She started a week ago for us.
Okay, welcome, Jenna. Okay, so if that's it for the updates, for training, I do want to say at the top here, if you haven't heard, sadly, Becky Bonacci accepted a position. She's gone back to the clinical lab. So she's no longer with us at the NPHL, but we thank her for everything she did in the education and training world for the state. She will be missed. Upcoming trainings, we're preparing the Graham Stain Challenge and the challenge set, so expect notifications for those to come out soon. And I am working on an LPX review. The results for that, they seem to come out later and later into the year. And then, so I got them, and then we did our two big wet workshops, which are a lot of work. So I am putting together an LPX review, and some more information will come out about that soon as well. I guess we'll open it up. Is there any other new staff or any other comments or concerns? Okay, well, that is it, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Next meeting, November 10th, second Monday of the month. That one's back on the Monday, regularly scheduled Monday occurrence. So yeah, thanks for joining.